Welcome to this student engagement webinar from Edumondo, a panel discussion on management simulations and student engagement. I'm the host, Leon Lloyd, and I'll be hosting today with my colleague Milo Hendricks. And we've got some great guest speakers from the University of Sussex, Royal Holloway University of London, and Durham University. Well, without further ado, let's hear from the speakers.
Thank you. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our discussion on simulation and student engagement. My name is Tilba. I'm Associate Professor in Strategy and Governance in Durham University, and I have been using simulations for over a decade. So I'm quite happy to talk to fellow colleagues who are having the same experience. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Anna. And Vicky, could we get you to introduce yourself, please?
Of course, I would like to also welcome you all in our discussion today. My name is Vassiliki Bamiatzi, and I'm a professor of strategy international business at the University of Sussex Business School. I have also, as Anna, been using simulations in my teaching for almost 11 years now, and I'm happy to be part of the discussion and also interact with all of you.
That's great. Thank you, Vicky. And Dhruba, please could you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Welcome once again to this webinar. My name is Lahiri, Dhruba Lahiri, and I'm a lecturer at Royal Holloway, lecturer in international business and entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is the sort of area that I'm focusing on. And my experience is in using simulation as part of a postgraduate program. It's a modified version of the simulation. The idea is to encourage consultancy skills. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's what I'd like to share with you.
That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you to all three of you. And as I say, we're absolutely thrilled that you can be here to join us in this discussion, which we think is going to be really interesting. So we're really looking forward to it. Just to give you an overview of what the plan is for today. So actually, we're going to have a quick word about Edumondo management simulations, just to give you a bit of context. And Milo, our colleague Milo Hendricks, is going to do that in just a second. A little bit later, we're going to go into the main purpose of today, of course, which is the panel discussion. And that panel discussion is going to be focused, as you know, on student engagement. So everything to do with student engagement and, of course, in relation to management simulations. We've allowed 25 minutes for that time. So that's hopefully going to be enough, at which point we're planning to break off into these breakout rooms. And that will give you a chance to choose which room you want to go into as attendees and, get up close and personal with the simulation itself. And of course, ask questions to the speakers about how it's used on those particular courses. Hopefully we'll have around 10 minutes towards the end for a summary and some closing remarks. And we can just maybe have a look at perhaps which themes came out from the individual breakout rooms and give any opportunity for some final Q&As. And hopefully finish on time at 12 noon. So that's about the content. Milo, please can I hand over to you to give a bit of background on the company?
Yes, thank you very much, Lean, and welcome everyone. Good morning. My name is Milo Hendricks, or Milo, as you can hear from my funny accent. I'm calling in from the Netherlands. Actually, our headquarters is based in the Netherlands, although I have to say we have a very strong presence in the UK. A couple of colleagues such as Leon and Callum and some other ones live in the UK as well. You see a couple of flags on this page as well. So our main markets, so to say, are the Netherlands, the UK, but also in the Arabic area, we have our colleague Abrar Lilani over there, who is managing that area. So a lot of attendees today come from the Middle East as well, if I'm correct. So the company, I'm just going to keep it short and quick, so to say. So I just have 2 or 3 slides to give you some background. The company, if I may have the previous slide, Lynn, the company exists for about 20 years, 40 people working for us. We work with a lot of different universities globally. But also some of the larger companies use our management simulations to train their staff or to recruit staff. So next to about 20 different triple accredited business schools, for example, globally, we also work with Deloitte, KPMG, for example, to train their staff, as I just said. Next slide, please. So the 3 main speakers today, we work with them for a number of years. And I just wanted to give you a short background about the management simulation platform they are using. So that will give you some better view of what they're using and how they are engaging their students with it. So the management simulations, we offer work like this. They're all web-based, so you don't have to install anything locally, and it always works on any device and on every sort of location in the world. So students can use their tablets, their laptops, even their smartphones. What we do is we will divide their groups of students into teams of about 4 students per team. And each team will manage their own companies, and in a highly competitive setting. So it's really engaging because one team's decisions will influence the other team's results. So you can imagine if we would, for example, drop our selling price a little bit, that we can steal some market shares from our peer students. So there's ranking lists, there is stock exchanges, there's market shares which the system shows to them. So you can imagine that students really like it, they're really engaged, and therefore they learn more because they really want to absorb all the information which is in the platform. So all these strategic tools and all the other frameworks, they really want to understand how they work because they want to win. Easy as that, especially business school students, so to say. So these simulations always are played in rounds, and each round stands for a year of operations, and they played for a number of rounds, and that's flexible. So one lecture, for example, uses it for only 4 or 5 rounds on one day during an MBA residential, where the other uses it for 8 rounds once a week for the length of the entire module, for example. On the next slide, you'll find a quick overview of the different simulations we have in our portfolio. Today in the breakout rooms, we will focus on the first one here, Faux Ventures, in which students are managing a globally operating smartphone company. This one is used by Vicky on her second year undergraduate students. Then we have the second simulation here, the emerging markets, where the students are trading bicycles to the 4 BRICS. So that's Brazil, India, China, and Russia, of course. This one is used by Anna Tilba at Durham with first year undergraduate students. And last but not least, we're using the business consultancy simulation, which is played by Dhruba at Royal Holloway, in which students are managing or taking over, I have to say, a company which trades in shoes, in trainers or sneakers, depending on where you are. So this was, these are the simulations we have, and I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion from now on, Leon and the speakers. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You're muted, Leon.
That's great. Thank you, Milo, for that. And well, we're now going to go into the panel discussion. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing. And I believe we're going to start to talk with our guest speakers. So, well, perhaps I'll start with by asking Anna. You mentioned actually in your introduction, Anna, that you've been using simulations for around about 10 years already. So that's quite a long time actually for using simulations. So you're a bit of a pro, really.
Well, yes, Leo, thank you. Yeah, I have been using, I had to reflect actually on my experience of using simulation. And I've just realized that over the past, whatever, 10, 12 years, I've taught students, I've used simulations for 60 students. I've used simulations for 500 students. I've used simulations for an undergraduate level. I've used them for a master's level. I've used them for just business students or a mixture of all the students from all the faculties and the universities. And now I can say that I've used simulations with face-to-face and fully online with the new reality that we have in the kind of new scenarios, and it's worked very well.
Well, that's really interesting actually, because you know, I think that the fact that obviously we're talking about management simulations, which clearly have a very close link to business schools, but actually you mentioned, you know, non-business students as well. You've used them with, and we've got a few experiences as a company working with sort of non-business courses, because of course there's still so much you can gain out of the experience of a simulation as well. Vicky, what about you? You've got some longer experience as well than just your current use with Phone Ventures, right?
Yes, Font Venture has been using it only for 4 years, but I've actually started, when I started teaching, I was very much into the simulation and the benefits of simulations, because my teaching philosophy is actually providing the students a hands-on experience and putting them in the shoes of managers, of decision makers. And it's much easier to actually do it through a simulation. So since I started my teaching experience, I've introduced simulation at various levels like Anna, and I've even actually used simulation at an executive education program I used to teach among entrepreneurs. And it gave me this opportunity to actually see in practice how they decide on their own, but also how they decide in groups, in taking actually into consideration all the information that they had in hand. So for me, that was the brilliance of using simulations in class.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, no, and well, that's really good to know. And Dhruba, what about you? Is this the first time you've used a simulation with us currently at Royal Holloway?
Yes, at Royal Holloway, it is the first time we are using simulation. In fact, I could say I've introduced it first time as part of the postgraduate. The reason partly was the idea was this is a business entrepreneurship consultancy program. The idea was to sort of encourage or develop skills, consultancy skills. I needed a project. I was doing one of those live projects, but found that that was not working out, or students were finding it, basically they weren't equipped or skilled enough to sort of engage in a live project. So that's what sort of compelled me to rethink and sort of see if there was another way I could develop this experiential learning. And that's when I introduced the simulation and sort of modified the simulation and made it into a consultancy simulation rather than a competition. I mean, the traditional one which I ran one of them in the undergrad program, which was for the sneakers. But that was purely a competition. This one is not competition. This is about turning around a company, a failed company, taking one of the examples and sort of turning it around. So that gives the students sufficient exposure to multiple facets and also brings them on board, because like I said, they're from different backgrounds, and trying to bring them all onto the same page was the challenge. Yeah, so that's
interesting. Yeah, no, that's good. And but by the way, just a quick reminder to our participants, our attendees today, that if anything of particular interest you want to follow up with, of course, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions in the breakout rooms. I just thought it might be useful before we go any further to just sort of say that this is about student engagement, using management simulations. And I know that for a lot of universities, clearly student engagement is very high on the agenda of a lot of academics, but also senior leaders within institutions as well. I thought perhaps it might be useful just to make a distinction, because student engagement actually can also mean something different. So for example, I know a lot of universities refer to something around the student voice, which is actually where universities are capturing the views of students in order to inform their decision making as universities, and that's very much something different. So that's not what we're talking about today, the student voice, so engaging students in that way. We're very much talking about the other sort of student engagement, so making sure students are engaged, well, in the learning and teaching, of course, but beyond that as well. So, well, perhaps you could give me your thoughts on what student engagement means to you, really. I don't know who wants to go first.
Well, I can.
Go ahead, Anna. Go ahead.
Oh, well, what's really been fascinating that I've observed over the years is that students realize how different that experience is of that active learning and active processing and being involved with building your own case studies. That usually students tell me, well, I thought engagement is us showing up on the lecture and, sitting there physically being present, or I thought being engaged means that we go to our online space with all information is just archive. But actually with simulations, students actually get to live in this online active environment where they get to actively process information and assess real-time, simulated time information, and actually take ownership of projects and create information themselves. And I thought that was also a very rewarding experience, but also very fun and exciting experience. I know Vicky had probably similar things to say.
No, I completely agree with you, Anna, and I am on the same page. For me, student engagement is active learning, but it's actually putting the students into the shoes of a manager, a decision maker, and taking accountability of their decisions. And in the simulation, what I actually find fascinating is that they can make decisions and they can see in real time how these decisions are affecting the performance of the company and in relations to the rest of the competition, because I use typically competitive simulations, so they can see if they make the wrong decision, they have to effectively make it work in the next round, because otherwise the company will start losing ground. And this practical engagement and practical experience and accountability, it's actually, for me, very, very important, particularly where we're talking about employability and how to actually teach our students to be to decide and to use all the information that we give them to actively make a decision. This is where I think simulation comes to close the loop in a way. And I have to admit that we used to do that, and many of our colleagues do it with case studies, but it's not as engaging, because in case studies, first of all, you cannot use all the information, you cannot give all the information on the same at the same time. And for me, most importantly, you don't have control of how they interpret the case or what are the decisions they're making, and so you can give feedback. In the simulations, you have this, I think, accessibility as a teacher as well.
I think yeah. Sorry, Dhruba, I was just going to say there's quite a lot to unpack there actually, because I think that's really interesting. I suppose just taking a step back, one of the things I think, Anna, you mentioned around, when we used to think about engagement, or still do perhaps from a wider university perspective, students on campus in on-campus times, non-COVID times, will be sort of swiping in to show they've attended and they're actually present physically in a lecture theatre perhaps, or they're swiping in to show they've gone to the library or whatever else it might be. These are of course important indicators that students are taking certain actions to be part of a university life. But of course, so whilst I'm not belittling that, of course it doesn't necessarily mean that students are present in the mind and are sort of motivated and paying attention, I suppose. So I think that's perhaps a distinction I just wanted to make, and I suppose maybe that's something that reinforces both of your points you just made, the fact that actually with management simulations they're able to sort of be more present, they have to actively be involved, right?
I think, Leon, one important thing that I also should stress is this beautiful ability of the simulation of putting organization in context. What students learn on their undergraduate and postgraduate master programs is, of course, you have a module on strategy or a module on human resources and a module on marketing. And they all seem to be separate and compartmentalized. But when you are in a simulation, students do get the sense of how different parts of organization and business and organizational life actually works together, and how to assess different types of information and engage in kind of diagnostics and critical thinking, which we want also always encourage in our students. So this realization of how different parts of content that we teach them on our programs combine and work together. It's been quite a fascinating even experience for me as a lecturer, as a person who teaches this, because I've got students who were probably, one was studying human resource, realized that he actually loves finance because he could see how in the simulation you have to look at the balance sheets, and this is what the student really liked doing. I had people from law thinking, wow, I want to take strategy because I think this is really exciting topic. So this is where a really nice platform for students to experience how different topics and things on the program come together.
Yeah, if I may comment on that, actually, because I had a very similar experience when I was teaching the entrepreneurs, I was telling you earlier, you would be surprised, but some of them didn't even know what the marketing department was doing, their own marketing department. So putting them actually into the simulation and working closely with the other peer members, obviously, it makes them realize how everything connects. And that is what we are trying to give to the students as well. In my perspective, even this role playing, I tend to assign roles into my students. One is a general manager, the other is the marketing manager, the other is international manager, and exchanging information and making decisions as such for the business is very, very instrumental to the knowledge.
Absolutely, yeah. Dhruba, did you want to say something? I think I cut you off.
In fact, actually, Anna has just said it, because I was going to sort of highlight the point that how simulation forces to interlink, or to show the interlink between the different subjects. And maybe just an additional point, it also exposes the students to this idea of what they don't know or what they should know in order to manage the business. So it almost points out the sort of gaps in their knowledge and forces them to therefore sort of seriously think about the gaps that they have and how they might want to make that up, make up the gap or cover the gaps. So that's what simulation sort of brings everything to life. All the theoretical mumbo jumbos that they've learned over the years sort of is brought to life, and they can see the application of it, and they can see it real life. So it's sort of summing up what Vicky and Anna has sort of said. But yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I found simulation. Besides all the communication, the interpersonal skills that they need to have in order to, on a day-to-day when they have to take the decisions, the group has to work properly. So all the politics and everything else that goes with it to make, to be effective. But that also is very important, the communication skills, because students develop that through this process.
Well, there's so many topics to sort of go down here, but I think there's we could really sort of take this in many routes. But I think just a couple of things which really stood out from the discussion so far. I think case studies and maybe the difference between case studies and simulations. Perhaps that's something we can go into more detail on. But also, I suppose it's been mentioned already, the fact that this is bringing together, simulations bring together all of those functional areas within a business. But of course, within teaching, you have all of these separate modules, right? So of course, that's the way it has to be to a certain extent, but actually for students to feel that marketing is separate from strategy, or that supply chain is separate from operations, well, of course, that the reality is that all of these things interlink. And I think that's what you're getting at, is that actually, the simulation provides that opportunity to bring all of these functional areas together so that you don't have those siloed out, separated decision-making points, really.
Leon, sorry, I'm just looking at the questions. We have some really interesting questions from the audience coming in, and I want to comment particularly on Nigel's question about competitive element of the simulations, and whether it is actually can demotivate some of the students, because many students maybe don't like to be in a competitive environment. And what my experience is always been of a group and team dynamics. You've got shy students, you've got more dynamic students, and there's always going to be that kind of mutual group dynamics, which I don't want to interfere with. I always start with saying that we're trying to train and prepare students for the real world, and in the real world sometimes we have to work with different people with different temperaments, and that's one of the things that I think Dhruba was referring to, is the notion of learning other tacit skills and other skills apart from just the subject level skills, is the communication and understanding who you are as an individual. It's also a journey for students to understand, are they leaders, or are they really good team supporters, or how. What I first do in the simulation is do this the team role exercise where students get a little bit of sense of who they are. Are they natural leaders, or are they supporters, or are they organizers, so they can then assign the strengths, and those who are probably not as competitive. They could be really good at analysis and data crunching and number crunching. So there's opportunities for different types of personalities to kind of be effective. And so in the end, it's all compromise and leading to assessment. In the end, all students say, well, if I disagreed with all my students on how we ran the business, is it possibility in the final assessment to actually for me to say, so the individual, how I assess the students is by individual assessment, and that's how they can then relate what they've learned. And many would write completely different strategies and say, this is what I would have done, as opposed to coming to a kind of a compromise. I don't know if that was the experience of Vicky and Dhruba.
No, what I tend to do is you're absolutely as an end sort of capstone thing. I ask them to have a reflective essay about their experience and what they sort of maybe a principle or an issue that sort of triggered their thinking, and then to sort of give their version. So that allows them to sort of express their own version of how they saw the learning experience. But then yes, then there's also the project work as part of their experience of actually turning around the business. That's the assessment. I see there was a question from Vincent about what was the assessment types that you use: reflection, business plan. It's actually all of them, Vincent. I mean, you know, a mix of them. At least in my course. I don't know about Vicky and Anna, what sort of assessments you use here.
Yes, for me, it's similar actually to both. I have a group assessment and I have individual reflection like Anna, but I would like to stress what Anna actually said, that different types of personalities can equally engage within the simulation, because first of all, I understand Nigel saying that slow decision makers, you don't have to make decision in an hour or in a minute. You know, we give time, and typically I run weeks of rounds, so to give this time of reflection to the students, you know, individually, but also as team, to give them the time to come together and work together as teams. But at the same time, I do follow Anna, your idea as well in role making in the beginning. So I give them the test, they test themselves, they see what are their personality characteristics, which sometimes they don't know, and they decide on the roles within the simulation accordingly. So in that way, they also embrace their strengths, their weaknesses, and at the same time, they realize that they get into a competitive environment. We all have to do it. So that the competition element comes to strengthen effectively the experience rather than, in my perspective, demoralize them.
One thing to add about assessment and the competitiveness of the simulation is that assessment doesn't, so students who do really, really badly, sometimes I have teams who lose a lot of money and they're at the bottom of the rankings and the charts, but they still write top class essays and assignments, because I don't judge them based on their performance. It's always nice that people at companies or teams are winning, but it's what students learn. So it's the reflection and using and coming back to theoretical. I always call it kind of like a marriage of practice and theory together, which we either do really well on theory or do really well on practical side, but it's the combination of both. And the assessment really comes, and I've just marked 400 of those assessments for the simulation. It's really, it's very fresh in my mind how students evaluate, and this whole element of critical reflection of not just using conceptual frameworks, not just understanding that pestle analyzes political or macro environment, but what does it mean for your company? And that's the reflection of understanding and connecting theory to practice that I assess in my module.
And that's perhaps, you know, the crucial part, isn't it? That, you know, again, coming back to case studies are a great way to try to get students sort of thinking about a theoretical framework. But of course, the problem with that case study is that students haven't been part of that case study. So the simulation gives them ownership of that. They're actually in the case study live, making it happen as they go. Just a couple of points. Perhaps it's good for some of the attendees to know just some more general points. So perhaps it's useful to know that students can actually take a different role within the simulation. So one of the students could be the CEO, one could be the CFO, one the HR director, and so forth. And that can really work quite well to facilitate those discussions which the teams are having, because as you mentioned, Anna, it's not about necessarily who wins or who loses in the simulation. Of course, that adds to the competition, the competitiveness. But actually, it's about those discussions which are happening behind the scenes. So every time a team has to make a decision, those students are having to discuss that. And that's really where the important part comes. Those discussions are really prompting the sort of thinking, deeply thinking about those different management frameworks and how those apply to the decision-making process. Just in terms of the assessment as well, I think perhaps we're getting a general sense of this, but it might be useful to say that generally it seems that, you know, the individual reflective piece is usually a big part of the assessment within the simulations, but of course it's up to the individual lecturers how they choose to assess. But sometimes it can be around group work as well, or a combination of that individual reflective piece plus a group presentation, for example, and then maybe a little bit of marks for the ranking list, if you like, as well, just to encourage that participation. But yeah, any more thoughts, perhaps, Dhruba, on that?
Yeah, I mean, taking on Anna's point and Vicky's point, I mean, about the assessments, my take on it is that I tell the students, I'm not interested in what results you actually achieved. That's not the important point. It's what I want you to answer in the report is, why did you achieve what results you achieved? Mm-hmm. So what did you do right, or what did you do wrong? Can you figure it out? And that's what the whole purpose of the grade, or the grades that I give, is based on that, not so much whether you came first or last, or what you got or didn't get. You know, it's more, what do you think went wrong? Can you figure that out? Even if it went wrong, so tell me what went wrong. You know? And the whole report is based around that. You know? So yeah, so that's the thinking, that's the purpose behind the group report. The individual report is, of course, more about reflection of a principle or a point, which they might want to explore through literature review, etc., and sort of build on it, you know, and try to explain it. Yeah.
Just to add on Dhruba's point about, I used to have assessments when I taught strategy using traditional methods or traditional case study when I didn't use simulations. So one of the standard approach of giving us an assignment is the student can analyze a FTSE 100 company and take a strategy, and then using all the theoretical frameworks, they can then analyze the external, internal environment, looking at strategies and provide recommendation. This is kind of the 3 pillars of the assignment that you would get in a standard business sort of module. But obviously one of the drawbacks was always that students go out and, let's say, they look at HSBC website, but they can never get the data, the actual numbers, the annual reports. So there's always been a very superficial level of analysis, because you can always find really glossy strategies and PR kind of polished materials online with these companies, but it's very difficult to actually judge the kind of strategies and how it works in practice on the ground. And by having an example, by analyzing their own company that they've been running for a term or 2 terms, they have all the financial statements, they have the outcomes of all their decisions married together with their analysis. As every time they make a decision, they have to analyze the market, they have to analyze the industry, the macro environment, and react to it. So it's much easier in a way for students to actually have access to their own data that is stored for them as a result of work that they've done throughout.
And also, if I may add, it's easier for us also to monitor what they're doing. So it's easier to give feedback. So one problem that we have in the case studies, or if you give them real time information, is that you don't know, as Anna said, where they found the information, how reliable it is, and how literally they assess it. While in the simulation, you can actually see the decision they're making and how these decisions are affecting the performance. And you can see actually the students in the assessment reflecting upon this journey, which I find particularly instrumental for their effectively, learning process. So yeah, it it gives you a better control also over the outcome of the simulation in the group, but also of how closely the feedback, then the reflection is to the actual effectively journey.
I mean, yeah, one of the reasons I used simulation for the consultancy, my postgraduate consultancy course, was because I initially, like I said, this is the third year I'm running it. The first year I threw them in the deep end. I literally said, okay, do a live project, go meet some people and figure out what the hell's going on out there. And frankly, students were dead scared because they just didn't want to go out. They didn't meet anyone. So basically just went to the library, picked up, as Anna was saying, some annual report or someone and sort of wrote up a report and submitted that, which defeated the whole purpose. And that's when I thought, okay, since students are reluctant to sort of, or maybe for various reasons. I mean, one, they don't know who to go to. Two, they're not equipped, skilled enough to actually go out there and talk sensibly with, say, the MD of whoever in a big company in the local area. So that's what sort of compelled me to sort of bring in this simulation, because that's less threatening. Let's put it this way, and they get more comfortable. It's easier for them to handle. So that was another reason why I thought, okay, instead of a live project, this is the next best option.
By the way, Dhruba, thanks for that. And I've just noticed, thanks for all the attendees who are asking questions in the chat function. Sorry if we haven't addressed them all, but there is one point I just thought maybe I could ask quickly before we break out into our breakout rooms for the speakers here, just to say about maybe online, and any thoughts around how difficult or not it's been delivering these simulations in an online capacity.
If I may start, to me, I found it very easy. After all, the simulation I'm using is web-based, and I believe all simulations, most simulations are web-based. So all the information are there. I found it very easy actually to communicate with the students, to be able to, to pass them all the information that they required. There is an extra element of complication in the sense that when you are developing groups, you have to have a platform to monitor the groups, which you cannot, you cannot do as easily virtually. So I found different platforms to assist me, but once I overcame this problem, it was really, really easy to even communicate with the students through the simulation or outside it.
My experience has not been that positive, I'm afraid. I like to work, and I like to see students face to face, sitting in a big computer class and having free discussions. But obviously, with our restrictions and the pandemic, I had to move the entire module fully online. And looking and so I had 420 students, and from different time zones. So there were a lot of people, students from Asia and the Middle East. And so we had to deal with time zones. So when we had a full decision time at 1 o'clock in the UK time, well, it's 10 o'clock in China. So that was quite a difficult challenge, but students overcame that with having their own platforms that they use, their own chatting, and they took it offline and they made decisions in that way. So they were in a way very resilient. But because it's online, one of the kind of things to look out for and a disadvantage of lacking this physical space to gather is that many students they had to live with their families and their parents, or in farms where internet is not guaranteed. So, for example, in the UK, we have lots of places where people live in the countryside, and so internet connection itself was very challenging, and some students couldn't hear properly. So, to have a fully online experience to me was challenging, even though by the end of the module they all had very satisfied, happy students because they've adapted. But it was a challenge to organize and to rely fully on technology, which can be tricky. And even my internet sometimes gave up and I froze. And so this has been, I hope that we can have both elements of online simulation where you can do and use online platforms, but actually a lot of face-to-face I was really missing this year. So I'm hoping for bringing it back next year.
I take that point. I mean, I agree. In sense, my experience was that I mean, it should be said that simulation, while it's a fantastic tool for experiential learning, it's a great thing. It does require support. Our students do require a little bit of interactive one-to-one counseling, etc., because a lot of them sort of have to come up to speed to use spreadsheets or analyze data, number crunching, whatever. So there is some support required. And that I found this year because of the pandemic. I mean, I couldn't give it, obviously everything was online. And so there was a little, that element was missing, taking Anna's point. I think it has to be a mix between the two. The fact that it's online is great because they can actually meet remotely anytime they feel like. They can go into the simulation, play around with it as and when they want to. So that's the great part. But there is the support part, which I couldn't give as much because of this pandemic, which I would like to have. So maybe the 50-50 route is the best.
I think we all get tired of looking at people in 2 dimensions.
I know. And especially, I don't know if you use Microsoft Teams, you get these round balls with just the initial DL or something, and that's all you're staring at for 2 hours.
Well, certainly it sounds like for the imminent future, some sort of hybrid way of working is probably going to be likely, for the near future. So, well, it's good to hear your thoughts around that. The idea now is that we're going to have, we're running a little bit behind schedule. So we've got 3 breakout rooms, and there will be an Edumondo facilitator in each one. But there will also be, of course, one of our guest speakers in each of the rooms as well. So you get to choose one of your breakout rooms, choose the one you like. And what we'll do is we'll because we're running a bit behind schedule, we'll try to come back to the main room, I think, in 10 minutes. So we'll have a little bit shorter in the breakout rooms. We'll come back at 12 and we'll have a bit of time, hopefully, for some final thoughts and a bit of recap. So please choose your breakout rooms and head off into those, and we'll show you a little bit about the simulations. But please feel free to ask questions. Please feel free to show your cameras in the breakout rooms. It won't be recorded in the breakout rooms. Okay, see you there.
Can I have a quick question, particularly to the module I'm teaching? In corporate finance. So is there any simulation games, particularly I can use in corporate finance, like the decision making for chief financial officer?
Yes.
Because all these kinds you talk about is more about management, marketing, but I'm in accounting and finance. So if I apply this simulation to my students, is specific to the module I'm going to teach.
Well,
we actually have, shall I answer?
Go ahead, Milo, yeah.
We actually have 2 management simulations focusing on strategic accounting management, so to say. One we've developed in cooperation with Deloitte. It's called the CFO Challenge, which looks like to be a good fit. The other one is the chocolate factory, where students manage their own chocolate factory. And we actually have developed that one because we all love chocolate. But it also has a very strong focus on accounting and finance. So please feel free to drop us an email. If you respond to one of the emails you've received with your question, we will send you all the information you need.
All right, thank you.
And that goes for anything else, really. I mean, if anyone wants to explore any of these simulations in more detail, please feel free to just respond to any of the communications which have been sent out in the run-up to this session. Of course, and I'll put some on the final slide. I'll put some contact details on there as well. Perhaps it's useful, well, maybe to say if anyone else has any questions, maybe we could have just a couple of minutes quickly. Otherwise, maybe.
Well, I think I'm happy to stay a little bit. I know that there's some people were asking questions in our session, and if they want to stay a little bit longer, I'm quite happy to stay maybe 10 minutes longer, because after this, I don't want to be answering hundreds of emails about Edmundo, which I will certainly have no time for.
Okay, sure. Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Vicky, is that the same with you and
Sure.
Dhruba?
Yeah. I'm okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll carry on then for another 10 minutes. Then that's great. So does anyone want to ask any questions?
Hi, Leon. Hi, Milo. My name is Nafis. I'm joining from Maldives, and we've been using these simulations for almost, I think, 6 years now. And I have a quick question. I know I don't run the simulation myself. I have colleagues who deliver the modules, and then they, of course, they are much more familiar with the simulation themselves. I know students love them. And of course, we've initially used the chocolate factory in one of our modules, and then now we switched to the mobile phone. I have a quick question. Do you really do you evaluate a student experience, from semester to semester, once they have interacted with simulation, have used the simulation, and what their feedback is? I'm sure you'll be doing that. Do you have an instrument that I can use, for example, in my, department, for the simulations that we run? Thank you.
So I think, so I think what you're saying then is do we have something which measures the student experience, measures the engagement, right?
Yes, what students think of the, their overall experience. I know it's been positive. I really want to see if there's a instrument, fairly quickly short one that I can use, so that, it gives us, formal feedback, and also perhaps we can feed that information to you as well. Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps we can open that up to everyone, but just some quick thoughts. We have a Google form which we've created, which we've sent out to colleagues in some other universities, where they can just issue that to all the students on perhaps the day that the simulation finishes. So on their last round, after the last round's closed and you've done a winners ceremony, perhaps you can just issue this form out to everyone, and they can all complete the form to get those anecdotal feedbacks from all the individuals.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very important tactical recommendation I can make to colleagues, especially who are worried about NSS scores and the P-test scores at university, is you can really match the end of the simulation and the award ceremonies to the time where students fill their student assessments for their modules. I'm sorry to be very cheeky and tactical about this, but usually I find that my students, when they finish the game, they have really up a living on the high. And when they have the student satisfactions with the university and the program, and they usually, the scores are really affected in a positive way.
So any other questions from anyone?
Yeah, okay. I have a question, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. This is a very valuable presentation. I want to ask you a question. Is there a way that you can link the simulation software and the sessions when you are as a faculty, you are setting up the simulation with the learning ILOs? In other words, at the end of the journey, you want to assess what did the student learn in terms of the ILOs measurement. So I have my question can be breaking down into two. The first one, can I develop my own simulation given my environment and the culture and the business environment within the country? I can create my own simulation scenario. The second thing, can I really link the assessment and the interactions of the student and the learning feedback the student gave with the ILOs in order to measure the impact of learning? So this is my question. Thank you.
Who would like to take that question?
Well, it's a technical one, so I think Milo should.
Yes,
I don't know if it's possible.
Yes and no. Thanks for your question. Very good question. And we get these kind of questions very often. So the implementation process would work like this. We are happy, for example, to look at your module outlines and module objectives. And based on that, we can see which of our simulations would fit best with your module objectives, etc., but also with your student level and the subject. And some of our simulations are very flexible. And we have Gijs here on the call as well, who's our operations manager. And he's really good in fine-tuning these simulations to make sure that there is a certain sequence of events and a certain focus on specific topics. So most often within the business study subject area, we are able to match student level and the subject of the module. So we're happy to look at it, of course, if you like, and to give you some advice.
And regarding, if I can just add to Milo's point, regarding the linking of the learning objectives with the simulation, as in my case, for example, what Milo and Giz did help me is that I had certain learning objectives about consultancy skills, etc., and we sort of tweaked the simulation and made sure that it sort of fits or it matches the learning objectives. So we were able to customize the software, customize the simulation to my requirements. So as Milo sort of said, it's possible to do that, depending on what your objectives are.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, perhaps if there's no further questions, we should draw to a close. Does anyone have any urgent, pressing questions which they'd like to put in?
Last question, please.
Okay.
If the university, I'm a professor, I'm academic vice president of the university, Aliyah University in Bahrain. If the university at one point, they want to really assess and experiment with this experience, there is always a period of what we call a trial for these softwares. And how long is it? And what will be the cost structure?
Okay.
That's the one I want to ask. And, importantly, I didn't get the answer from you guys. Every country, every business model is different. There is a lot of attribute that is localized. So there are examples. It's very important that when I bring a product like this into the university, we want to have the freedom in generating the simulation contents. And, is that possible? So I would like to get the answer for that.
Yeah, well, for sure. Like so a number of our simulations are very flexible, and we can change things to make them perhaps more suitable for certain local geographic regions. So that's certainly possible. But the extent to which we can do that, I guess we'll have to discuss. In terms of answering your questions more generally about trial periods or costs, I think perhaps that it's worth our colleague Abra following up directly with you and having a conversation about that. Does that sound okay? That's okay with me. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, he's on the call as well, so I'm sure we'll make sure we've got your details and we'll follow up directly with you. Because if every university, because we come across a lot of these ideas, innovative technology, smart work, a lot of creative ideas. It's very important. We need to test it because faculty will not go, buy in very easily. There are many elements of, usability, how easy it is, learning curve. So it's really extremely important is to have that what we call, the test period.
No, that's fine. Yeah. What we do most often, to answer this quickly, is that the best way always is to schedule, for example, a 2-hour slot on your university, pre or before or after COVID, or online, in which perhaps a couple of your lecturers and yourself, perhaps, or maybe a couple of your students, play a couple of quick trial rounds, so you get a better understanding about it. That's most often how we do it, and then based on that you can make your decisions, etc.
Can I just? Sorry, can I just add an important point in terms of introducing new things to the curricula, to the existing programs? What I found most challenging is the administrative lag, or when you introduce new things onto your module or into your assessment or into your program, there is an inevitable administrative process to go through with program approvals. So if, you know, what I've discovered introducing simulations in both Newcastle University and Durham University is that there's almost like a 2-year lag almost, where you first need to introduce the changes, build up a case for your this pilot, and so forth. And it takes time for the academic program sort of machinery to kick in. So you can't just sort of go in and say tomorrow, next semester, next term, I'm going to use simulations. That's not been my experience, because it's always been build a case for it, and then you have to put a budget request for it, and that takes time. So you have to almost plan in advance with this.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because we had an experience with the smart book. I don't know how many of you guys utilizing smart book. It wasn't easy. You have to find, you know, change management, and you have to go graduate. I'm expecting such things like this, what you guys talking about today. It need really an area where I call it, you cannot really have it across all programs. You can have it across certain courses, and maybe, you know, these courses have to be simple courses. Faculty is very highly technical, more into engagement of creativity. That's reasons, you know, I was looking at the presentation. Example, MIS, project management. I was expecting you have a list of courses. You could tell me, here is the courses we have, our experience, and here where, how we implemented the simulation things. You know, that's what example I was expecting. A slide where it showed me, hey, these are the courses that you can start with. We see that it is a big impact. Example, maybe first-year student will not buy it. Maybe fourth-year student will buy it. Maybe graduate student will buy it. Because these are all factors of decision-making. I don't know how you can help me in that.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting point. I think just to quickly sort of say on that point that I think, you know, there's a lot of questions which perhaps will be more generic for and relevant to a number of different universities and courses, whereas also there's a lot of questions perhaps which will be more specific. So I think maybe it's best if we just pick a lot of these questions up offline and we have these directly with you, because yeah, hopefully that will be more personalized to what your needs are at your own individual.
Sure, I agree with you. You have my email. If you drop me, we will schedule with a couple faculties and we will go through practical experience demo, and we can answer all these questions.
Great, thank you very much. No, that's fine. And just to say, there's been a number of questions in the chat as well. Thank you so much for everyone for sort of being interactive in that sense and trying to sort of take part. For example, I know Natalie Langley has mentioned around maybe it would be helpful to have a community or discussion board for educators using the Edumondo simulation so we can share ideas. We've clearly got a lot of existing users of our simulations on the call today. So that's great. Well, Natalie, that's something maybe we can think about and discuss internally and maybe get back to you on that. I think that's a really good idea. If there's any other questions we haven't answered in the chat, then my apologies. Please get in touch with us afterwards so that we can take those questions offline with you individually. And well, we've gone really over time. So sorry for that, but it's actually been a really interesting conversation. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all our speakers. So Vicky, thank you very much. Anna, thank you. And Dhruba, thank you very much as well. It's been really great.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
And well, just to sort of say finally that, yeah, if you'd like to get in touch, there's some contact details, my contact details on this last slide. Feel free to get in touch if you have any questions and you'd like to discuss management simulations in use at your institution. Otherwise, we'll follow up, of course, with a recording to the webinar as well. Thank you for attending. Webinar is finished.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.